Okay, we're standing at the southern end of an enclosure in the Borrowdale Valley called the Falcon Crag enclosure. This is Falcon Crag on the skyline, so named for obvious reasons. Many years ago, about a quarter of a century ago, I was sitting on cat bells, the fell on the other side of the lake, looking across at this fell side. And my role in those days was woodland warden. And I simply looked across, and what caught my eye was Ashness Woods here and Great Wood at the far end, and this semi-empty void of land between the two, which is about 30 hectares. So it's a substantial piece of land. And out of that, just sitting there, I thought, well, perhaps I could have a chat with the farmer who grazes this. And it was a farmer called Will Cockbain. And I knocked on his kitchen door. This was, you have to remember, this is nothing to do, nobody has suggested that I did this. I just sort of thought it might be a good idea to find out what the issues were. Anyway, I said to Mr. Cockbain, because it was the first time I'd met him, do you really like that piece of land under Falcon Crag? We always refer to this as under Falcon Crag. And he said, Maurice, he said, I hate it. And I said, well, why do you hate it? He said, because when I come to gather my sheep, and his sheep graze all the high fell up and over towards Thirlmere, he said they always run downhill and onto the Borrowdale Road. I said, so would you be prepared to not graze it if there were some financial incentive? And he said, I'll shake your hand now. And that literally, that one conversation and that one few minutes sitting on the other side of the lake brought about this enclosure. So that first discussion was late 1998. This enclosure went in late 1999. So it took less than just over a year to overcome the Lake District Special Planning Board, as they were called, who were at first absolutely against it because it would just simply turn to a wasteland. If you look across, you can see the cat bells and its bracken and its bareness. So you imagine sitting up there and seeing this great gap and these two remarkable woodlands that are both triple SIs and soon to become SACs in those days. The thing that struck me was why on earth do we have to have this gap? Why can't we have continuity? And there was the R word wasn't thought of in those days. You know, no one was talking about rewilding. No one was talking about woodland restoration. This was just simply, in my views, to manage the landscape in a way that worked with natural processes and saw the restoration of the cover of woodland. And so my vision was, in those days, and went on for years, was that you would be able to leave Keswick and walk through Great Wood, through this woodland, walk the length of Borrowdale within woodland, which is almost achieved today. One of the key points when you come to restoring a piece of land or woodland restoration, whatever you like to call it, is obviously your objective. If you don't have a local seed source, then you are basically going to restore grassland and ground cover. You're not actually going to get woodland. So if you have a viable seed source, as this area did at either end, and of course this wasn't completely devoid of trees. There's old ash trees and old birch trees scattered all over it, and old hawthorns. So the decision was made. It wasn't really a decision that was made actually by committee. It was in the wonderful days when if somebody thought you could run with this plan, we would run with it. And so the idea was that there would be virtually no intervention. We would see how things would progress. So basically that immediately gives you can relax because no one is putting you under pressure. There was no window that had to be closed after 5 years or 10 years. Nobody knew and nobody could tell me in 1999 how long it would take for trees to arrive here. We knew that the issues of grazing were going to be removed. The farmer was completely on board with the scheme and kept his sheep away. We have deer through here, both red and roe, so they're going to impact. But we had no idea of what was going to happen. Nobody did. And so it was a case of wait and see. Well, we got to year 5, about 2004, and the bracken was now massive. It's small bracken this end, at the far end it's taller than I am. And so the bracken became that massive green sea in the summer, and it was impossible to find any tree regeneration at all. Several other interesting things happened as part of that initial intervention of removing one grazing species, and that was obviously all the grasses developed. Plants such as adder's tongue fern were found. The grasses developed, all the herbs developed, and of course the ground mammals, bank voles populations exploded. With the expansion of that population of very, very small mammals, the most striking thing that happened is that we had barn owl coursing this area regularly for the first 5 to 6, 7 years. So that was an unintended consequence, one that we didn't know was going to happen. The other thing other things that would have happened would have been a massive explosion in invertebrates, but still no trees. So we didn't intervene until about 2005. It's quite interesting that people use deer as a pest. I don't. I tend to take a very much Vera type view on deer, especially big deer. Yeah, they'll cause a bit of damage. They'll take the tops out of 1 or 2 things. But look at the great bramble patches that we've got that never used to be here before. And trees coming out of the bramble. It's very much a great way for trees to survive the pursuits of red deer. Roe deer have very little impact. They might select the odd tree, and we do cull our deer, so the deer are under control. We don't have a Scottish scenario where deer rampage through in great hordes. They do like the yew. We've had to cage the yew trees that we've planted to keep the roe deer off, because they do find it quite palatable. So other than that, we haven't had any major pest problems at all, really. As you know, we've had some seriously major storms in the Lake District during the period of this scheme. The last one was Storm Desmond in 2015. We had another one in 2008, 2005. Major floods. We haven't had any serious rockfalls. We've had no land slippage. Virtually, water that gets on here gets held very nicely. There's such dense vegetation now, so no climatic issues at all. Get the occasional rockfall, but then that's geology. That goes on forever, doesn't it? Areas like this, I think, having had 20 years to establish, will undergo changes due to either severe climatic change, that could be drought in the summer. We've had very, very dry early part of April was almost desert-like here. That in itself brings a threat of fire because of the bracken that you see now, and we're into you know, middle of May, and there's no new bracken showing through, so there's still an enormous fire risk. So that change in weather in the early spring to dryness is a bit of a problem and will cause fires. We had a major forest fire, fire on the other side of the lake on Forestry Commission land in April. But there is a map produced by, was online very recently by the National Trust of 2020 to 2060 projected damage and soil loss over all of its property in England and Wales. And red was extremely high, and I think dark green was extremely low. And the entire Lake District was extremely high. Now, you have to ask yourself the question, why is the Lake District in danger of losing its soils with increased rainfall or erratic storms, such as Storm Desmond, which I honestly believe has raised the level of this lake by many, many centimetres. I do believe the lake is much shallower, of the literally millions of tonnes of sediment that move through the valley. So I would predict that this will be quite stable, irrespective of the rainfall, but I predict that up there will be less stable, as will be the land opposite and as will be the land in the north. And that is a consequence of how we manage. If we want to manage our land so that it has a very narrow, poorly developed sward with exposed soils, and we know that heavy rainfall is going to increase over the next 40 years, we have an opportunity now to make changes. But those changes are highly sensitive and affect people's lives and livelihoods. They affect the culture of the area and how people feel about the area. But if there were 2 or 3 Storm Desmonds over the next 2 to 3 years, there wouldn't be a great deal to look at on the high fells. So it's up to politicians, not people like myself. All I can do is say this is what we have, and this is what has replaced what you see as a generalisation of the high fell land in the Lake District. There's a company called Blue Skies who mapped the British Isles very recently, and they mapped the greenness of the British Isles. And the greenest area of the British Isles was...
Don't tell me it's going to be a city or something.
It is a city.
Is it?
Yeah, it's London. Yeah.
Really?
The lowest area in the British Isles. Forget Scotland. In England, lowest area in England. The Lake District at 0.14% cover.
Great.
0.14%. Now that isn't an estimation, that is taken from absolutely superb satellite imagery and then analysed using Esri, and so it's accurate. It's accurate down to 3 metres. 0.14%. So if you have only that amount of vegetation cover, big vegetation cover, which of course that means that underneath you should have this sort of stuff, then you have to make some decisions for the future.